different things. JavaScript was designed to be a more lightweight, designer-friendly, interactive language to add interaction to the web because we just had HTML, CSS. Everything was
Mhm.
truly static at that point. Java was made to be that more robust, engineer, almost business-like, but it was still a lot about interactivity in the web. And so we kind of pushed Java more and more and more to the back, and it seemed like this archaic old thing when the ages of the two are very similar. But now Vaadin ecosystem brings it back to the front end where, this can do awesome things. It's
Lawrence Lockhart, developer advocate at Vaadin, talks about using Java on the front end, highlighting Vaadin's frameworks, which enable Java developers to build full-stack apps without JavaScript.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. I am your host, Rob Ocel, the VP of Innovation at This.Labs. Today, I'm excited to be joined by my co-host, Danny Thompson, the Director of Technology at This.Labs. Danny, how you doing?
I am great. Super happy to be here. Excited for the guest today, too. I think this is going to be a big one.
That's right. And say no more. We are excited to sit down and talk with Lawrence Lockhart. Lawrence is the developer advocate at Vaadin and a tech community leader. Lawrence, how are you doing today?
I am doing great. Honored to be on the podcast and chat with my friend Danny once more.
Yeah. And that's great. Well, it's wonderful to have you here. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that honestly, I wasn't sure I was going to talk about at all again since the early 2000s, since the days of the applets had ended. Yes. But we're going to be talking about Java on the front end. So to get us started a little bit, can you just kind of let us know, I suppose, for people that aren't familiar, how this is even possible and kind of what that means to have full stack Java, I suppose.
Absolutely. So I work for Vaadin. First of all, I'm not sure we said that yet. Vaadin is the company, and it is also an entire platform that I think these days is the one-stop shop. It is a go-to solution for building business applications for any individual Java developer or individual Java team, Java-backed team. So we do have two frameworks, a robust set of components, and just a ton of tooling that just continues to expand probably every quarter or every other release. One of those frameworks that's super exciting and fun to work with is called Vaadin Flow. Vaadin Flow is, as you mentioned, full stack development with a single language using Java. And what happens is for a typical Java developer, let's say a backend developer, right? And they're used to writing models and entities and service classes. They now have the ability to write additional Java classes that, because of our framework, will actually generate HTML and send that to the browser. So the browser ends up getting used, say, like a thin client, where you do that initial load, you get the HTML that you need at first, and then all updates that is required as a result of interaction from the user, those get sent back to the server, and then we re-render what is needed back to the front. So it's a reactive model. One of my talks that I recycle is called Full Stack from the Back, because you're using a traditional backend language. It's still Java that you already know and love. It's running on the JVM. But no, this is not GWT. This is not Swing. This is not FX. This is its own standalone framework that's really exciting. Something that, fun fact, I never even heard of before I worked here. So I've been here for about a year and 2 months now. And when I decided to get into DevRel, I wanted to narrow it down to the stack that I knew best, which was anything Java, JVM, that ecosystem. And there's not a lot out there, but Vaadin was one that was really exciting and doing some neat things. And the more I find out is that the more people find out about it, they love it. They just never heard of it. So there's always that initial skepticism. Like, I've seen this before. Like you were talking about, like, I've seen this in 2005 and I didn't like it. Fortunately, this is a very brand new thing based on all current web standards. We are lockstep in with the new changes coming in with Java and its releases. And we have a nice, very frequent release schedule. So that's what's going on there in short.
I have a very obvious question, I feel like, and it's probably a big one or a difficult one. Why? Like, we deal with JavaScript frameworks coming out every single week. Now we got to worry about Java coming out with a framework for the front end. Why? What is the purpose of this? Why was this the solution? Why?
Great question. So, fun fact, and you know this already yourself, Java is not going anywhere. It is one of the most popular languages that you can find throughout enterprise. I actually did a survey a few years ago, and I think it was maybe like 2020, 2019. It was the most popular language used in American enterprise that were not tech companies. So it's everywhere. It's in airlines and banks, and it's absolutely everywhere. And so some of the problems that they deal with is why the Vaadin ecosystem exists. So fun fact, we are not here to provide a new solution for JavaScript developers or for Python developers or Ruby. But if you think about how Ruby has Rails and Python has Django, Java developers, Java teams now have Vaadin. And so things that it answers would be tedious front end to back end communication. So if you think in terms of just the layers, right? A presentation layer, what I'm going to see in the browser, some back end services doing their thing. There's a communication layer that we found very often can be opinionated and people won't even care, which means if you were to just take care of that for them, they can get to prod a lot faster. So the Vaadin platform, both frameworks, which we only talked about flow so far, but both frameworks take care of a lot of that front to back communication. Even with our with Hilla. So that's one of our other frameworks that combines a React front end, a TypeScript front end, and a Spring Boot back end in a single bundled project like a meta framework. So we have a single annotation that will generate TypeScript equivalent methods on the front end for use for all of your back end methods, which means if I need to find all for a select user or do any kind of thing on the back end that's defined as that method is immediately available in my front end, even using React. It's even simpler using Vaadin Flow, which is all Java because it's Java on the front, Java on the back. So I simply will call my backend methods from the front. There's not really other technologies or any other frameworks where you can do that. That means you also have some help with state management. State management is a huge thing. You're not going to struggle with state management, for instance, with Flow when it's all being held and managed on the server itself, managed in the JVM. And then context switching. So the idea of going from front end to back end team. Something I talked about at the Dallas Jug, I think you might have heard this as well, is that we're seeing all these efficiency plays from corporations these days, whether it's artificial intelligence, outsourcing, downsizing, which we seem to go through waves of downsizing. But I think a move towards full stack development is also one of those solutions. Can we take a single team and produce more? And for a Java team, that's what we come with. So Vaadin Flow comes to a Java team and says, hey, we know you're used to being backend developers. We can literally make you full stack developers overnight with a solution that is intuitive, easy to pick up, primarily open source. All of our core features are open source and free. People can start with them overnight. And so that's some of the questions that we answer.
So many questions have popped up in my mind, but you said one thing, in regards to like AI that kind of made me remember a very specific scenario. I was at JConf, which is a Java conference. It happened in Dallas a few weeks ago. Really great experience. And they apparently always do a survey at the conference where they're, I guess, trying to get a consensus on who's on what version of Java. So they said, hey, who's still using Java 8 in their enterprise level organization? And probably about 15% of the room threw their hands up, which
For
I was
8?
like, wow, that's still, for 8. And then they said to 11, some more hands went up, and then 17, about 40% of the room was at 17 or below. Right. And I remember one of the speakers was giving this talk on how to utilize some AI tooling from Redis. And he's like, this is going to work for like Java 21 and up. So about 40% of the room, y'all can't use this yet. But so I don't know why you're here to hear this talk, but it'll be cool to check it out. Like, wow, 40% still. But so then my question now came because you're talking about like getting to production faster, or it's like React focused. So if you have an application that's using like, let's say Java on the back end, React on the front end. So obviously you're using React in some context. Are there certain scenarios where you're like Vaadin is a better solution for you to use in this scenario versus just using React? Because if you're using React, you're going to have some kind of state management already, whether it's Redux or TanStack Query or something like that. And so you have some form of state management happening. You've got your back end working and you've got your front end going. Where does Vaadin fit in that mix?
Yeah, great question. And that reminds me of, for whatever reason or no reason at all, when Kelsey Hightower came and visited FedEx some years ago when he was still with Google and I was still with FedEx. And one of the very first things he said in this talk, we had like a Google day and they made the whole lobby look like Google. It was really weird. But anyway, one of the first things he said in this talk was, I'm not here to tell you to lift and shift all the FedEx services and drop them in GCP. We're not here for all of your problems. We're very good at doing certain things. I'm going to try to illuminate those. And we're very bad at doing other things. I was like, whoa. I didn't even know Kelsey at the time. And that was actually the beginning of my fandom, hearing that level of transparency. So in a similar manner, we're very great at some things and other things that we're absolutely horrible at. So if let's just say a team is currently using React and Spring Boot specifically, Spring Boot Java, a Java backend. Again, we're here to empower Java developers. Our original strength was making full backend developers full stack. But what if you're already doing full stack things? All right, number one, you can now have a communication layer that is abstracted away. So getting front and back end to talk with React and Spring Boot is going to be typically either REST APIs that you have to write or GraphQL, right? Which aren't necessarily too complex, but it is a thing. You don't have to use that either one with the Vaadin Hilla framework. It literally just goes away. That's number one. Number two, the overall ecosystem itself. So it's not just, hey, take your framework away and give our framework. It's when you come into the Vaadin ecosystem. So for instance, if you do Hilla, that's React and Spring Boot, yes, you get the communication piece, but you also get the web components, right? So we have 50 web components out of the box to handle so many common business cases, which is what we're great at. We're great at building business web applications that live on the web, not necessarily just websites. 50 components out of the box, ready to use to handle so many common features, cut down a ton of coding, an additional add-on directory, right, which is open source with probably 1,000 or more, not just front-end widgets, but back-end tools, things for communication layers and layouts and you name it. So you've got all these building blocks in the ecosystem. You got the communication layer in the ecosystem and the whole corporate support and everything else we do, because identifying yourself as, hey, I'm a Vaadin user, all right, you just get into our forum. You have developer advocates, you have sales folks, marketing folks, people who are helping you with all sorts of things that you formerly were doing on your own, or may have had a less attentive audience because, again, React is like so incredibly huge, which we're going to be huge too one day. But for now and for the foreseeable future, we have dedicated people who have eyes on all our users. What are our monthly active users? Where are they? Where are they found? What countries are they in? Let's make sure we're reaching them in our emails. And we respond to emails. I literally we had an email go out, I think last week. Someone asked about a conference. And so we're interacting about conference talks we can do to bring Vaadin to you. So super active group that we have here, highly invested engineers. Like, these are really, really smart people. I think the head of marketing, sales, and product were all engineers. When I came here, I was like, okay, these guys are real. The Finns, the Germans, you've heard it before. So you're getting an entire ecosystem. You're not only getting the framework, but an entire ecosystem to help you build. Cute cat.
What I like too about this is that there's been such a discourse recently about web components, which we do not need to get into right here. But Vaadin has been on the forefront of sort of web component innovation since day one. And what's really cool about it is to see that years after all that investment, how that's enabling tools like this. Yep. This idea that you can, you were talking about, we were talking about Flow, but there's also like the React version of it. And this idea that a lot of this, if you just go to the website even for it, and it goes, there's a little like toggle button and you can see this is the React version, this is the Java version. And it doesn't look visibly different. The interfaces are a little bit, and a lot of that I assume is driven from all that innovation in web components. I mean, Can you talk a little bit more about kind of like how that kind of enables this, I suppose?
Yeah, so we look at that as the building blocks. That's the building blocks that we're building this entire ecosystem house on, is our web components. And so, and even in the exchange between the two frameworks, what you're going to find is, so there was a development where, okay, we're Java on the front end. That's what we're known for, Vaadin Flow, which used to be just called Vaadin. Then we expanded it and recognized sometimes more granular control is needed for that UI, right? Developers need to be a little more fine-tuned. So we added the framework Hilla that includes React. In our most recent version, speaking of versions, Danny, I think it was 24.5, you can now actually add React views to a Flow framework project or a Flow view to a React framework project. So they're interchangeable. And at the root or at the bottom of all that steady layer is the web components. So that's what we build it on, to answer your question and how all that works. That's what we base the whole thing on. Without the web components, we're just something else. I'm not sure what that thing is. But that is the building blocks that we build on, and you can get very far just learning our components, building on that for business application processes, and have the forms, have the grids, have so many ways of handling and managing data that if you add your traditional backend services that you're already used to, have a quick way to go to prod. And there's a CTO that came to, I think it was Connect Tech, no, it was DevNexus last year. He said, I love this because sometimes I just want to see the data. Like, I just want to see the data. I don't want to go to my Java team and tell them I need a dashboard and they need, 2 months of story points to learn Angular. Just show me the data in the browser. That's it.
Right. That's
one of the things that Vaadin Flow is great with, because we give you those components that you mentioned that we've been working on and we're constantly iterating on, and we integrate them into the frameworks themselves, and they work both ways. Flow to Hilla,
Yeah.
Hilla to Flow, which is super unique and actually a brand new thing as of this year.
And, I don't know how popular sort of micro front ends ideas are in the Java ecosystem. I assume it's as prevalent of a business problem as it is with anything else. But, the idea that you can have those Java backends and one of your teams might not need to have hyper specific React, spa-like customized views and is very comfortable with kind of the Flow libraries of components. But then somebody else's team needs something a lot more customized, a lot more, fine-grained control. But that idea that you can then have those two teams interact and consume each other's outputs is, for an engineering manager, an engineering leader, like you exactly were saying, with the cost, that's a very enticing sort of idea. That we don't have to get rid of anything we're doing on the back end, and
Correct.
Each team can engage with the version that they want to engage with, but yet at the same time, we can still have and leverage each other's work in what we're doing.
Absolutely. And that's one of the cool things about watching it. When you notice the whole ecosystem, you'll notice flexibility is always ingrained. Flexibility. So even if we talk about, hey, if I build a whole project in Vaadin Flow, let's say it's some huge monolith, but then I need a single view, and it's just got to be React for whatever reason, right? It's the CTO's favorite thing or whatever. React has something that Flow just can't do yet. You can literally add that without breaking anything you have going on. You can literally add a single page view or multiple. In a similar way, I've had people ask me about microservices. It seems like we're trying to push them to have everything so tightly coupled. What Vaadin Flow does, for instance, the 100% Java framework, is, yes, your UI for a particular view or set of views is tied to the back end. That can still make calls to as many other Spring Boot backend microservices, for instance, as you wish. It can be dozens. You don't have to change anything you're doing now, but this gives you more power and flexibility. Even like with our new AIs, we have a Copilot tool that we've written that is really exciting. You can make changes in your code, see it in the browser, make drag and drop changes in your browser, see it in the code. I think it's 3 months free, then it's very cheap. I don't know, 10, $20 a month. Here's the thing. You can literally get started there and then go right back to coding as normal and nothing breaks. Like you're not locked in where, okay, I started this, now I have to finish my entire project this way. You could start a project and use it for 3 months, and then when trial runs out, all right, I'm done with that, and just go right on to what you've always done. So in everything that we do, both the frameworks themselves, the components, and even our new offerings like the AI offerings, flexibility is always built in.
So, you've said a couple things, and it has my mind kind of working a little bit. One of the biggest focal points of front-end development right now, it's a very large talking point. You see talks about it at every conference. The organizations I've personally worked for, it's been a massive push, especially in the last couple of years. And you kind of said one thing where this kind of stems from, forms, right? And I think users being able to utilize a form is a very big focal point. I didn't hear anything so far, and I could be wrong. Hopefully you can shed some light on this. How do you even make that accessible with something like Vaadin? Like, what are we even talking about? Can a screen reader pick this up? Is there anything there that makes sure and ensures that users that have some kind of need for a screen reader, they can utilize the component?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're asking about accessibility. Happy to talk about that. That is one of the features we are very proud of. So let's start at the very basics, right? Because accessibility for me at the basics starts with semantic HTML. If you're just all about div soup and everything you do, anything you add on top of that is just adding on top of non-accessible code. So fortunately, all of our web components we've been talking about starts with the use of semantic HTML. That's what's driven on the back end, which helps the organization of how everything is going to appear in the browser itself. So we start with that. Next thing, the web components we keep talking about. All of them are based on the web standards, the web content standards. And so whether it's perceivable, operable, understandable, all that's baked in because that's how we build them from the beginning so we don't have to fix things later down the road. Things like keyboard navigation, all that's baked in as well. And then we also have, so I mentioned our Copilot feature, so we have an accessibility checker that you can run. I would show it to you. I'm not sure if we have sharing ability. But anyway, we have a accessibility checker. For whatever you put out there, if you want to just do an entire scan of your page, then you can one click and it'll do that for you and show you the results right there in your browser when you're in test mode or in dev mode.
Wow. Okay.
And that's a really big deal because my vision is not what it used to be. So yes.
All right. Well, more of this conversation, but first we'd like to thank today's sponsor. This episode is brought to you by This.Labs, the experts in modern web development and consulting. If you're looking to scale up your development teams efficiently or need assistance in turning your innovative ideas into reality with robust proofs of concept, This.Labs has you covered. This.Labs doesn't just build software, they build partnerships. They collaborate closely with your team to understand your unique challenges and craft tailored solutions that drive real results. Join the many companies that have accelerated their growth and innovation with the help of This.Labs. Visit this.co to discover how they can help take your projects to the next level. Thank you to This.Labs for sponsoring this episode and for supporting the developer community. So, Lawrence, we've been talking about this Java on the front end a lot. And I guess maybe we can point now to the back end. So I'm curious with like the Vaadin way of doing things. I mean, a lot of these people are going to have existing backends. I mean, Danny, you were joking about there being so many JavaScript frameworks. I mean, the Java developers are laughing, man. I remember working on Struts frameworks on some government projects way back in the day. I mean, they've got frameworks for years and years and years at this point. Like, so with people that are using kind of this Vaadin integration, what do they need to know as far as their backend organization, and what kind of rules or things that you enforce? Can they come at it with whatever systems they have? Do they have to build adapters? Like, how does that work on the backend side of things?
Absolutely. So we support a few different architectures on the back end. I think we were optimized for Spring Boot, but we've seen people use it with enterprise Java. I can't even think of the word right now, but just use it with plain Java, if you will. We've seen some backends with Quarkus. So we don't have rules per se, but I think we're optimized for use with Spring Boot. But as opposed to thinking in terms of rules, the benefits and the offerings would be what I would emphasize. So again, some Java team out there hears this podcast and says, maybe we want to try this, but we have a certain way that we like to do things. What do we need to consider? Consider what we're adding. So we have mechanisms that are not only for the front end, as you mentioned, but also for the back end. Mechanisms for routing, mechanisms for data binding, binding data from, for instance, form fields directly to your back end models, which allows for form validation to happen again from the back to the front. So for instance, if you were to have, again, some data model and you put the restrictions on that in the back end, it's automatically copied over to the front end, the validation in your forms. All that happens from the back. We're integrate with everything that goes on with Spring, whether it's Spring AI, Spring Security, Spring Data. So you can use all those the same way you always would. But it's more so in terms of what we're offering, in terms of we need to change and do things super differently. We do have a Vaadin way, but when you look at it, it's pretty much the way I think most enterprises build their business applications already. Where you have data models, you have service layers, you have an interaction. As long as you know that you're going to be driving all that interactivity and driving all the view from your back end, that's like the biggest difference.
It's just really striking me, honestly, the more I think about this, how powerful the web component portion of this is that's powering it. Because when we first heard about this topic, I was just really wondering how Java runs on the front end, and the answer is that it doesn't. But the idea is that you are configuring all of these interactions through Java, and you basically have this system that framework, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, library code that exists on both sides of the fence, on both the server side and the client side, right? That's just sort of mediating this communication by interpreting all of your configuration files and all the model files that you've created. Yep. And, the more I thought about it, I was like, well, these behaviors have to be the problem then on the front end, because, it advertises like, hey, you don't need to know JavaScript. Hey, you don't need to worry about any of this. And so I was wondering, I was like, well, where do you get the customization? Where do you get all of that? And I guess the answer is going to be that it's all in the models, right?
Mostly in the models, yep. But if you have any interaction, we have tons of classes, and all in the tutorials, of course, to help you with user interaction, for instance. So much of the user interaction, whether it's with a button click or a form submittal, they're going to look a lot like JavaScript. But the thing is, you're writing it in Java to keep you from having to context switch per se. But a lot of that user interaction, which is going to drive the updates on that backend model, you're going to write all that in Java, and we have classes to handle, again, so many different use cases. We'd take an entire new podcast just to go over them all.
Is this all open source? I know so much of Vaadin stuff is open source. For the hackers out there that are really curious how you all solved this, is this...
Yes, for the hackers, which is hopefully all of us. I hope everyone is a builder who knows how to build things. That's one of the coolest things about being a developer. Like if you're a doctor, you can't just up and start, taking people's, I'm going to replace your knee over here in my garage for fun. Or if you're a construction guy, you can't just start making houses. Like you need a lot of resources. But if you're a developer, you got a laptop, you can start building right now. And so the vast majority of our core offerings are both open source and free, which is different. We do have a few specialized web components that fall into our pricing model, and a few small features. Like I said, the Copilot, you get it free for 90 days, and you can do it month by month afterwards after that. But the vast majority of our core offerings are free, including 50 web components, and I need to count them, nearly 1,000 web components in our add-on directory. So that's a really exciting place, the add-on directory, because what happens is some hackers will come on and they're getting used to it and they're loving it. And there's one particular component that they want, but it's paid. And maybe they may or not want to pay that. They'll go off with the team, make a free version, and add to the add-on directory. It gets approval, not necessarily support, but approval from corporate. And now it's available to the entire community. So tons of building blocks so you can get started and never pay a dime. The vast majority of our revenue structure happens on a business services side, which is not really my bag. I like to talk about the free stuff. That's what I get to talk about. So it's a lot of fun. I don't have to sell anybody anything. Like, hey, if you're a person who can code in Java, I can help you build things faster and better. That's like the whole pitch. And even the hackathons, I've seen people in hackathons use it. They're like, I thought I was going to just do the backend stuff. I can do the whole thing myself. I'm like, yeah, just use Vaadin.
Well, all right. So now one question comes to me. One part of testing that I often do is maybe testing some parts of the form checkout or something like that, but also some visual testing. Does all of this or any of this work with that? Or is there some maybe some areas where it may not necessarily pick up?
Yeah, so any way that you would normally test in the browser, you can still test. We haven't changed anything in the browser. We haven't changed how the browser is representing HTML. And then anything you would want to test in the, let's say it was Vaadin Flow Framework, which is all Java. You can use that. You can use any normal testing. I'm trying to think, whether it's Mockito or Mocking or JUnit, you would test those classes in the same way that you would always do. So nothing about this would change your structure. I've seen Playwright used a lot for some of our unit tests. And we also have, oh my God, we have a proprietary one. You see I'm stalling. I'm trying to think of it. You'll probably Google it. Test Bench. We have our own dedicated library called Test Bench for testing as well. Okay. It took me a minute there. Sorry, Marcus, if you see this. Yes.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Okay.
It's pretty neat. You mentioned the hackers. There's a guy who came, again, to Connect Tech, which is a conference in Atlanta, and he heard the Vaadin pitch for the first time. He's a traditional back-end developer. He's a solo hacker, so he mostly makes some more back-end type things. He learned about it, went home, tooled away. By the time there was the next big conference in Atlanta, which was DevNext, as he came literally running to the booth with his laptop, he said, I want you to see this project I made. I looked at it, really cool. It was like a login system for employees. He said, I sold this to a client. He said, and I've never been able to do that before because I'm just not in that React, Angular, Vue, next framework, Next.js, HTML. I'm just not in that world, so I can't do this. With Vaadin Flow, I've coded nothing but Java. I have a beautiful, clean, professional application that I've sold. Like, this is a real thing, and I just want to let you know this works. So that felt great. That felt really great. That felt like when you're empowering people to help them make their moves into tech and have new skills that they didn't have before. They have new skills, but it's leveraging what they already know, which is that core language of Java.
Yeah, I think that's ultimately what's been so cool. But thinking about this is that when people have been talking about using other languages in the front end, usually that's through the concept of things like Rust or, WebAssembly, whatever it is. They think that we're going to have to compile it down to something that the browsers will be capable of understanding. Mm-hmm. What I like about this is like no Java ever hit the browser technically, right? But like a system understood how it wants to behave, and it interpreted your code and then converted it into the assets that need to be run. It's like that built-in sort of, I don't know what you call it, a compiler. It's the bytecode that powers the web, basically, which is like really fascinating about it. Like you said, it's just such a great productivity boost to just be able to stay in that one language. Even in the front end, we've talked to many developers who are like, I love HTML and CSS and building experiences and accessibility, but I don't like JavaScript, and vice versa. Right, to be able to not have to know any of the you're going to have to know some of it, but to not have to expert in any of the three and still be able to deliver something that has a high degree of quality, the potential, but that's really, really good.
I think so. And that makes me think of a couple of things. So one thing I definitely want to add, so there's nothing about any of our frameworks that is getting rid of HTML, Correct. CSS, or JavaScript. So, for instance, you can make a 100% Vaadin flow application today, but you just have some CS skills you want to use. You can add CSS to a flow project, right? It's still HTML, CSS, JavaScript without being that. So you can still add that if you wanted to. We're not taking that ability away from you. And the other thing is just the history of those two, right? Java and JavaScript come out pretty much within months of each other. And both were designed to do different things. JavaScript was designed to be a more lightweight, designer-friendly, interactive language to add interaction to the web, because we just had HTML, CSS. Everything was truly static at that point. Java was made to be that more robust, engineer, almost business-like, but it was still a lot about interactivity in the web. And so we kind of pushed Java more and more and more to the back, and it seemed like this archaic old thing when the ages of the two are very similar. But now Vaadin ecosystem brings it back to the front end where, this can do awesome things. It's been there available for you all along, and actually kind of ties into the original intent of the language, like going back to Gosling in 95.
Well, I guess that you said something there that I did want to emphasize on, which is themability and customizability. I think the more magical and the more sort of connected that something is, I think people worry that it looks too much like every other version of these sort of Vaadin flow applications that ever built. So can you help people understand like what controls they have to customize their applications to look like whatever their designers came up with?
Sure. So it starts with, we have one theme called Lumo, which gives every possible styling imaginable baked out of the box, but with changes you can learn, right? So whether you're talking about typography, sizing, spacing, colors, anything of that nature, that's going to be built in with Lumo theme with tons of customization options that are very easy to learn, very intuitive. Or a person can just say, you know what, this is like Bootstrap. I don't want everything to look everything else. I just want to implement my own CSS. Style CSS works in a Vaadin application like it works in any other. It has to, because it's in the web. So you can certainly use whatever, I haven't seen many Tailwind applications. Let me not put myself too far out there. But definitely you can use your own custom CSS in both. And certainly in Hilla. We haven't talked about Hilla as much, because again, Hilla is React. So it's a traditional, good old functional components and all that. And you can style it the way you always do. Yeah.
I'll say one thing, because I know we're pretty much at time we're going to be wrapping up, but I've known Lawrence now for over 6 years, and it's just amazing to see his growth within that time period. I mean, from all different backgrounds. I mean, working from Fortune 50 organizations to working now at Vaadin, traveling the world, educating people. I think it's incredible. But to be honest, obviously I got to see a pretty interesting sneak peek of this at the Dallas Jug meetup that we went to, where I was able to kind of see it in real time, which definitely brought on a lot of questions that I think we addressed today. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely interested in it. I still mess with Java, so I'm going to try it out, maybe make a Vaadin project with it just to see what I can end up doing with it, and trying to push limits where I can, and get ready for the angry tweets.
Yeah. Make it break. That's what we love. We love when people come on Twitter like, this didn't work. You will see like half the company will be in the DMs and in the comments. So yeah.
Now I'm really, really my interest has definitely peaked, because I want to kind of see where this can go, but also I kind of see some areas, like my mind has been kind of working in the background, and I'm seeing like some areas where this is totally applicable, even at the last organization that I was at. So I'm like, I see some use cases that I wasn't necessarily aware of before. Especially when you're talking about cross-functional teams and some team just needing one minute thing on the page, to where it's like, hey, you don't need to make an entire story point project for the front-end team to do this. This could be something where it's like, hey, we just need one value displaying. Do we need to go ahead and go to an adjacent team, or can we just show this value? And I see that use case there. So definitely interested to see where this goes.
I'm glad to hear it. Me too.
Yeah, man.
I'm ready for Vaadin.net. So
Vaadin.net.
Just let me know when Vaadin.net releases. And
yeah,
take over the world.
That sounds like an inside joke. I missed that joke.
Oh, just I did a lot more C# dev in the past than Java dev. So yes. I'm just ready for the
Java
C# adapter coming up, right?
Good stuff. Good stuff.
Well, for people that were interested in this conversation, Lawrence, and want to find out more, but either about yourself or about the stuff that we talked about with the Vaadin Flow and Hilla, can you let people know where they can find you and that stuff online?
Sure. We'll start with the company, Vaadin.com, Vaadin.com. And as you mentioned, you can go right in and see the variation between Hilla and Flow, our two frameworks. And as for me, now I have a single username because Danny beat me up about that 2 years ago. Lawrence D Codes on all platforms,
Love it.
even Threads and Blue Sky. Lawrence D Codes.
Cool. All the rage these days too. Fresh new batch of people moving
So
over
I'm
to Blue
hearing.
Sky.
I
So
went
enjoying
back
the
to it and realized
conversation
I
over
hadn't-
there.
Yeah, I hadn't spoken on there in a year, so I have to refresh it. Found pictures that didn't even know existed.
I would say too that having perused it a little bit too in preparation for this conversation, that Vaadin has a really great splash page just for this Java development stuff that goes through a lot of the topics that we talked about today and has some really cool graphics that I think help really crystallize it for me. So would definitely recommend that if you're at all interested that you just go check that out. And that should help quite a bit, kind of, help some of this make sense. So
Appreciate that.
great. Well, that is going to be it for us today, everyone. Thanks for listening to this Modern Web Podcast. Thanks, of course, to our guest, Lawrence. As always, we say the conversation does not stop here. You can find Lawrence on Twitter, as you heard, at Lawrence D Codes, and many other platforms at Lawrence D Codes. You can find me online at RoboCell. As for Dan, you can find him online at DThompsonDev. As for the podcast, you can find us online at moderndotweb.com or on Twitter at modern.web. And as we close out, we'd just like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This is trusted by names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at this.co. One more time, that's THISDOT.co. All right, see you next time, everyone.